Okay, welcome to the May 4th JupyterLab weekly call, everyone. Looks like today we have 20 people right at the start. That's great. I will warn you that I have a spotty connection, and at some point, if something goes wrong, I'll tether to my phone. But if I freeze, somebody please start talking. But with that, let's get started. So first on the agenda today, we have Frederic.
Hello, hello. I will try to be not too long. So first, some announcement. We have released JupyterLab 3.4.0 yesterday. So feel free to try and report any bug. Hopefully not so many are there. Thank you for everybody that contributed to that one. I just want to remind also people from the console that there is a vote on the toolkit introduction in JupyterLab. I linked to the issue, and the vote is going to be closed tomorrow, as tomorrow is going to be 7 days past. Then some questions. There's been a PR for reverting the dependency link in render mime interface to avoid it to be bumped. So how can I explain that a bit clearer? So basically, up to a couple of days, that package was depending on the translation package. But that primary goal of that package is just to provide an interface for downstream extension, providing new render mime. And the trouble of having translation package as a dependency is that you get application and app utils as dependency. And so the learn tools that we are using for bumping version was basically bumping that interface, even if we don't change the interface. And so I opened a PR to break that cycle, and in order to upgrade that version only if needed. And so the question that remains is, do we want to not change the major version for that package, or do we want to bump that major version too? So that's the question behind it. Because up to now, so in the alpha release, we have been using v4 for that package too. So that means that all downstream extensions that are only depending on that interface will need to be bumped too.
What would be the motivation of taking this package out of sync with the rest?
The main idea, it's so normally for v4, it was decided that only package that needs to be bumped will be bumped. But at the current point, like all packages have been bumped, like major version. The idea was to not bump the package as much as possible for avoiding too many breakage of downstream extension. That's the main idea.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding the extension churn, but wouldn't having it out of sync with the major version release also cause confusion? Because like if I'm installing JupyterLab 4, I would assume all the parts of it are also JupyterLab 4 or later. Personally, I would assume they'd all be JupyterLab 4, but I know we have some extensions that are farther ahead than the major version. That's just in my head. I'll let Steve talk since he just raised his hand.
Yeah, I think the point of render mime interfaces was people that really don't want to interact with the APIs at all. They just want to make something that puts JavaScript on the page in response to mime type and sort of forget about it. There's meant to be a low barrier to entry to make an extension. So we really want to leave those folks alone as much as possible. They can make their extension, publish it, and it just keeps working. So if they have to bump it every time we bump a major release, then that raises the bar of creating one of those things.
Okay, so this is a very, very unique case.
Yes.
Okay, then yeah, based on that understanding, sounds fine to me.
So I misunderstood, and I thought render mime interfaces, the package, was a lower version number than the current lab version because of that exact property. But does render mime interfaces track major JupyterLab versions even if the actual APIs don't change?
So let me share my screen. Can make it.
That wasn't the intent. It might have happened because we picked up a dependency on translation. It just it came along for the ride by accident at some point.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the reason. So because we were having, is it big enough? We were having that dependency, and so the tools that we are using for bumping the version is looking at cycle, and as soon as a downstream dependency bump, then all upstream are going to be bumped. And because translation is depending on lots of things, that was very likely for a render mime interface to bump.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, if we are really hesitant to update render mime interfaces, I think a feature like translation is a good reason to update. So that makes sense. But I guess that also allows for when JupyterLab 7 comes out, render mime interfaces might still be at version 4, presumably. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the goal, as far as I understood, the goal is to go that direction. So because the more we advance and the more the code get matures, normally the less the API surface changes. And so the less you are annoying people for upgrading their extension, because most of the API is the same. And so they can keep using the old version. Go ahead, Steve.
I agree that we want translation of some form to be in that package. The way we handle this with document types is we basically inlined portions of the iDocument type or whatever the interface was into render mime interface. So people using render mime interfaces could still use that API, but they're not depending on a package, which then depends on things like application. So it might be something similar to do here to abstract out the iTranslation interface that is in this package, but not have it depend on translation package, or make another package that is just the interface.
Yeah, that's fair. Carla raises a point in the chat about, oh, I see. This is a vulnerability that shows up in the render mime package. So the render mime package is a little bit more like the other packages in JupyterLab in that its versions do change with some frequency. We released the package called render mime interfaces as standalone, with the hope that because they weren't concrete implementations of things, that they were interfaces and basically API definitions, that hopefully render mime interfaces would change more slowly than render mime itself does, which is the package that this issue is about. So it's related, but it's not the same package. Sorry, I've lost my tab. Oh, there we are. Fred, you had more things.
Just to conclude, so is it okay to open a PR for reverting the bump, or for V4 we will do a bump?
Is what Steve proposed feasible and not doing a bump?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
In the absence of a hard, concrete reason to have to change that version, it seems preferable to not, I think. What do other people think? Okay, we got a +1 from Jeremy for undoing the bump if possible. Does anyone disagree with undoing the bump? Yeah, the trouble is not that many people have spoken so far. That's yeah. Okay. All right. Maybe we should move on to the next point, and if anyone has anything to contribute here, they can they can write in the PR. What is that? 12493. But you had a few other points that you want to talk about, it looks like.
Yes, I don't know the next point. Maybe David wants to speak about it, but so David has tried to use the shared model package for testing in an external package for the YGS testing. And it's the trouble of the module being ASM module, but not exported as such. So I linked the PRE as open. So correct me if I'm wrong, David, or if I'm saying stupid things. But, but basically, the idea is you can now add in the package JSON an attribute that say that your package is a ASM module type by saying it's a type module. The trouble with that is officially you need to add the extensions of the files inside the import, for what I've understood. So that's
no, not anymore. Actually, you're talking about the .js extension.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not needed anymore because of an experimental option in Node. So we can afford not to add that, but we need to have the type module in the package.json.
Okay. And so the associate question with that I have is like, should we do that for all packages, or should we do it case by case, like in this case?
Yeah, right now I only need it in shared models, but I guess it would be better to add it everywhere, just for coherency.
So, okay, you tried to create a different package. That package depended on shared models. Then you tried to author tests using Jest, and it blew up because the shared models package.
It was using Node directly. It's when you are using Node directly.
Oh, not Jest, Node directly. Right. Okay. Is there a downside to doing this? Is there any? And if there is no downside to doing this, should this be on every package? I don't know anything about package management, you guys. Someone's got to.
To my knowledge, there is no downside to it because they are ES modules anyway. They use exports, and so they are not declared as such explicitly, but I think they should.
Okay, so all packages that are not dash extension, all packages that might feasibly be imported by someone, it seems like we should make it as easy as possible to import them in as many ways as come up organically. Like, you weren't doing anything weird. You were just authoring a package that depends on a package and calling it with Node. That's not a crazy thing to do. So it seems, yeah, it seems like a good move to do this.
Okay, then I could update this PR and update all packages.
Yeah, or at least all packages that are not the extension specific ones. But I guess there's no harm in doing that either. That way they all use the same package JSON format. So maybe it's best to just do all.
Okay.
Does
Thanks,
anyone
David.
who knows about this stuff, like, is there, are we walking into a trap here, or is this fine?
I would ping Jason Grout on the issue. He's sort of the expert on these type of things. And then I'd also say this is a good candidate for the integrity script to just put it into all the different repos for us. So we don't have to manually do it for new packages.
Yeah, fair.
If you want, David, then I can look at doing it on the integrity, and we can move forward with your PR, or just wait for that integrity update as you want.
Yeah, let's do with the integrity update then. But I'll ping Jason in the PR anyway to have his feedback.
Thanks.
Just for a question there. When we add this key, will that require this experimental flag to be used everywhere we call node? Or is that experimental flag also something you can configure more centrally?
No, the experimental flag is only to treat files that are exported or imported without an extension as having a .js extension. So it has nothing to do with the type module we're talking about. It's another issue.
Okay, cool.
And then, sorry to be long, last point. I have a demo. So as some people may know, for Notebook V7, we need to add features for the edition of the metadata of a cell, because for the classical one, so let me make my screen a bit bigger. So for the classical one, you can have a widget on top of the cell for editing the tags, or like you can specify like the type of slideshows. And so in classical notebook, there is no sidebar, so there is no such a widget. So for V7, we need that kind of features. So what I'm displaying here is a development version of an extension that's called JupyterLab and then Cell Toolbar. And the question was raised at the previous call for Notebook V7, what to do with that code. Should some of it be moved to official JupyterLab organization, stuff like that. Zach has had a proposition to say, okay, one thing that could be interesting is to bring only those metadata editors. So like, that means you get one data editors for the tags, for the attachment, for the slide, for the row cell format, and one specific link that just trigger the opening of a JSON editor. Should we bring just that part in core and to be able to set up Notebook V7 toolbar with the same code base, or should we move that extension or a simplified version of it under the JupyterLab organization with that features and make it as separate of the JupyterLab core? That's the question. If it's clear.
See, Brian's camera came on, so let's hear it. Yeah.
A couple things. I'll start with the UX related questions. When I was teaching, I spent many hours using NB Grader and in the classic notebook, which had this type of uses this interface, and it was quite a miserable experience from a usability perspective. The amount of additional clutter really sort of, I don't know how else to say, fatigue when using, if I was spending 10 hours creating a problem set for students, it was very fatiguing to go back and forth between writing code and using the tagging UI. I don't know that the JupyterLab sidebar for tagging is any better, and I've not actually used it with NB Grader. I don't know that it's worse, but I think this is an important dimension that for regular heavy usage, I'm not sure the the classic notebook UX is what we want to emulate. I don't know what a better idea is, but I want to emphasize it's not clear that it's the optimal one. The other is the user stories that we have in the JEP that detail how we're going to go through with Notebook 7, JupyterLab 4, all that transition. We're pretty clear that Notebook 7 will have sidebars so that key extensions like table of contents and so on will still work. So I'm not quite sure I understand how we're saying now it's not going to have sidebars.
So
Zach?
What, Fred, you feel free to answer that sidebar question, because I don't know the answer to that.
To add that there is a merge request, or at least an issue that's out for some time, to add the left and right sidebars to the class to Notebook 7 instance. This is inspired by work that I had started but not merged in for RetroLab. So I'll toss out a plug for anyone who's interested. If this is a need, we can add this to Notebook 7.
I think the idea with Notebook 7 was to not have them displayed by default, to keep the classic look and feel. And people used to the classic notebook we probably not want to use these sidebars, so they will look for something like they had in the classic notebook, like the cell toolbar. And they could, of course, use the sidebars when we add them, but by default, they would probably not be even aware of this kind of JupyterLab-like features in the beginning.
And the work in progress pull request associated with this does not show the buttons that are vertically aligned in JupyterLab. So even when we add that, you'd have to make a positive effort to even show those. So I accept that the UI is not going to be the same.
If I don't think it's in conflict with having or not having the sidebars. That's definitely a question of design, and but I think we should do our best effort to bring the UI as closely as possible as the classical notebook experience, because that's what we advertise we are gonna be doing. And also we said that the idea is that if somebody has written materials for their student explaining, oh, you can do things, we should do our best to make that material still valid for V7. So that means having the same kind of workflow, having a menu entry, and if you click on some position, then that will add some kind of new, that was the wrong button, new element that you can use for addition of the metadata. That's the really the need or the features I would like to cover with this.
So I'd like to just point to the original text of the JEP where we detail what sort of the supported user stories and decision-making principles that we'll use for making these decisions. And similarity with notebook, with classic notebook is not, it's not the top principle that we identified and voted on in the JEP. So and the reason we put those decision-making principles in there was to prevent us from having to rehab the same discussion many times over.
So what we talked about in the notebook meeting was it was kind of presented that the current cell toolbar, which I did say in that meeting, I want to give a shout out to the current cell toolbar that's in main. It is really sweet. The UX is really great. So I shout out to the group that worked on that. But we were talking about how these were kind of competing things. It's like you had to choose either or on these cell bars. And my comment was, I think that maybe there's a couple of overlapping functionality, but we should maybe decouple them, like have them solve actually separate problems. One of them really was attacking kind of the cell metadata, and the other one is like really common functionality, like moving cells up and down, copying, pasting, and so on. And so I think decoupling that would be good, so that we could really have these as two separate things, not competing. And then the question of whether or not to bring this in core is definitely a separate discussion then in that case. And I think that I don't have a strong opinion on that. I do think that I had I also used EnvyGrader, so maybe as a counterpoint, not to disagree with you, Ryan, but I use it a lot as a teacher too. And it was cell tags, for example, and things like that. Some of those UIs, having them, maybe not all of these, but some of those on the per cell basis is handy. Like you do find you naturally want to go there, and that's where you're looking for it. I think maybe the UX on how that's presented and may need some rethinking and so on. I think one more thing is Isabella could probably offer a little bit of context to this too. When Markel was working on cell tags, one of the cool explorations they did with cell tags was thinking about how do you add color. I know there was an accessibility question here, but how could you make cell tags more usable in the sense of really what you want to do is maybe like scroll through the notebook really quickly and be able to see what cells might be related based on their cell tag, right? Like these are homework question cells or whatever, if you're in the EnvyGrader context. And if they were all green or all blue or something, you could really distinguish those. Again, there was an accessibility question, but having the cell tags right there in the UX was like a big deal for EnvyGrader users. So there might be some parts that we can rethink and merge in there. But I do think we want to keep the enhanced cell toolbar and the current cell toolbar as really solving separate issues, so separate questions. And then whether or not it goes into core could be a second leg to that conversation.
Adam?
I just wanted to add something I really like about VS Code's interface is when you run a cell, it tells you how long it's ran. And presently in JupyterLab, that's something that you have to switch on, and it doesn't actually, I don't think that's part of the interface, but I find that really useful. And I just wanted to suggest that maybe if that could be part of what you're talking about now. It's just a thought. I don't know if anyone else likes that, but I find it gives you feedback, like a temporal feedback about your cell running rather than just something spinning around. And it's a feature I liked when I experienced, so I thought I should just suggest that.
And I do think part of where the classic notebook experience starts to break down is it's not very scalable. If that interface had not everything, I mean, a great example would be when someone's using EnvyGrader, it's likely they'll just need cell tagging and not the slide UI. And part of the visual clutter and fatigue of using it is the fact that you can't disable and enable individual components of that, but you get the whole thing.
Yeah, but we already have the scalable product, and it's called JupyterLab, right? So I guess the point with Notebook 7 is to make this opinionated UI that people still want for various reasons.
And I guess what I'm saying is, if the vision of the notebook interface is simplicity, I don't think it's simple to have only the sort of bulk choice of show everything above the cell or nothing. It would be really nice if I could say, hey, I just want to look at the cell tag interface there, or I'm just editing a slideshow. Let's just show that bit of metadata. I think it is a simplicity, or it's a way that the notebook interface is more complex than its users, I think, are used to or would like.
At the top of this call, I proposed that every bullet point only take 5 minutes, but we've been talking about these bullet points for half an hour, but thankfully it's not just stuff that is read and it actually extends, but we should probably move down the agenda because we'll never finish otherwise.
Is there an issue on a repo that we can continue the discussion on?
I can open it. I can open one in the notebook V7 because I think that's the best position for that.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Frederick.
Thanks so much. Okay. Alex, you are up.
Yeah, hopefully this can just be somebody knows the answer to this and just or points me in the right direction and we move on. I'm attempting to use this new extensions in dev mode flag. Well, new is relative, 3.0 new, to run both third-party extensions in dev mode and core in dev mode at the same time. But our third-party extension disables the launcher using this page control.json feature, but that doesn't work in this mode. They both end up being installed, nothing gets disabled, and they bang heads against each other and explode. So I was wondering if somebody with a familiarity with this flag and how it works could either tell me how or just straight up tell me it's not possible so I don't keep attempting to try it. I don't know who would be the best person knowledgeable about that though.
So is the question whether you can disable a core extension while in dev mode?
Yeah, I'd say that's the simplest way of asking the question.
Well, so why is it in dev mode is I guess the important question to understand how to answer it best.
So a good example is if I'm making a change, for instance, in like the file editor in core that I need to use in my third-party extension that works with the file editor. And so I am trying to develop them both at the same time, but my third-party extension also disables and replaces launcher. So it's no longer able to disable launcher. So when my launcher gets enabled, they have the same name and they butt heads.
I'm wondering if you could just remove the core extension from the list in your dev area and not use the disable thing, but actually just modify the JupyterLab source to remove it from the core extensions that it's pulling in the application. I don't know if that would be in the staging area, possibly. I think Steve left, right? He would be the person to answer this if he was here.
I think Steve dropped off. He was here earlier.
But yeah, if this is just for temporary dev work like that, where you're modifying stuff in the JupyterLab repo, I think you can modify whatever config file is pulling in the core extension and just don't pull it in.
Okay, that was the hack that I was using, except I was doing it the other way where I delete our code dynamically like that. But it definitely adds a lot more thrash because every time you rebuild, it like puts it back. So, but yeah, Jeremy just mentioned opening an issue. I'll open an issue because it sounds like this is something nobody really knows the answer to. So.
It also sounds like a bug, unless there was some by design reason that disabled extensions were being explicitly ignored in dev mode. It sounds like a bug.
I think it's partially a feature, right? Because you want to have custom extensions while you're not in dev mode. Then when you switch to dev mode, you're saying like, oh, I really want to work on only like the core extensions.
Well, that was the previous methodology. This new flag allows you to do both at once.
Right.
So, yeah.
So there's the core only, or the extensions in dev mode thing. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, you know, let's say you are looking to build a totally different launcher experience and if it's like, if it reaches a certain point, you're happy with it, then you're going to propose it. It sounds like very much you want to do exactly what Alex is trying to do instead of working from within the code base necessarily, unless, yeah. Okay, yeah, just let's open an issue, because either it's a bug and it gets fixed, or it's by design and we need some additional flag or something, right? Like, this sounds like a reasonable thing to want to do.
Okay, and I'll flag Steve and Jason, since they're the ones who did most of the build system work, to get their opinions on it, since they're both not in this meeting today.
Cool.
Cool, thanks for the help, guys. That's all for me.
Thank you, Alex. Jason, you are up. Jason W.
Okay. Yeah, there's a few things that I wanted to talk about briefly. One is I've been working on trying to pull the Cal Poly interns JupyterLab comments, which ends with an S, repo into core. There's a Team Compass issue about should we archive the old commenting repo, which hasn't been touched in about 2 years, in favor of pulling the project entirely into the JupyterLab project space. So just wanted to draw attention to that. We can continue the commentary on that, unless anybody has anything to add here on the call.
So the question isn't about bringing it into core, it's about deprecating the old comment repo and then moving the comments repo into the JupyterLab org.
Yeah,
So,
commenting is the one from 2020. Comments with an S is 21. We would pull that in as a project, and then separately there's a issue that I'm working on to actually pull that into JupyterLab core, but that's outside the scope of the Team Compass issue.
okay.
Yeah, so one day soon, JupyterLab core should ship with comments as a feature. And the steps to get there are pick among the 2 existing commenting extensions, which one you're going to build on top of. And the more modern one is using YJS and the CRDT stuff. So it seems like a better place to start, but that's in Jupyter Cal Poly. So step 1 would be bring that over and make it JupyterLab GitHub org. Step 2 is modernize that and get the user experience you want. Then step 3 is ask to bring that into core JupyterLab. And so what Jason's asking about is the beginning of that process.
I'm a fan. That sounds good to me.
Okay.
But in the past, haven't we had discussions about like preserving the history of repo? So I understand if you're archiving the existing repo, it's not going away, but is there any way that, like, I guess my thought is that doesn't show any relationship between the two. And from what I understand, there isn't any development relationship, but like from a user perspective, they're both commenting. Would that be confusing because the archive repo will still appear like commenting versus comments? Did that make any sense? Was that a coherent piece of feedback?
It is coherent. I think I agree. It's been somewhat confusing to even have conversations about it because of the similar names and similar purposes. I think as we proceed with this, it's probably a good idea to like update the READMEs in the same way as when you read like a Wikipedia article about X and
Right.
you have X, you have Y, which is very similar to X. You have that little note at the top that says, if you are looking for something else, click on this link.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. I was just wondering if there was any kind of way. I think Vidar is right too about keeping the name being important so that you're not getting the deprecated package by accident.
Yeah, especially because folks probably have repos, that are parented to that.
Yeah, I guess I just don't know if there's a way for them to come together instead of having 2 repos, but that probably is too much to ask, or like more work than maybe is helpful in the end.
Without a commensurate benefit.
It's also helpful to keep in mind that the goal, and it's a medium term or even a short term goal. The goal is to have comments in core so that no one has to install it anyway. So this is one step, is putting it in its own repo, but the next step is bringing that repo into core. Vidar, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so if it's bringing into core, that might make it irrelevant, but it's, as we did for Notebook 7, is that we have a new major version where we completely override most of the code, right? So that will still allow you to have the Git history of the old version, right? So that's the alternative to deprecating one and then bringing in another repo with a 1 byte difference in the name.
Yeah, but the analogy is off because of that difference in the names. Like there's 2 published packages already. There's JupyterLab commenting and there's JupyterLab comments. That's not an ideal state of the world, but that's already where we are.
Yeah, if they're published in a non-beta version and people are using it, then I'd say it's the ship has sailed. Yeah.
Okay, but to Jason's central question of, are we cool with bringing that repo outside of the JupyterLab GitHub org into the JupyterLab GitHub org? Are there any objections?
No objection here.
Okay, so I can never figure out when we have consensus and when we need to call a vote. It sort of doesn't seem like anyone said anything against it.
Did we? What's the governance there? Because previously there needed to be like a Team Compass issue and a vote for bringing new repos in. Does it matter anymore?
So I don't know if there is a process here outside of this is a decision-making thing where we either know via consensus or we know via vote. I'm only trying to figure out whether we have consensus. How about there is that Team Compass issue? Jason, maybe on that issue, you can say at this call, you raised it. It seems like everyone's for it. We'll leave it a week and ask if there are any objections. That way, we're not unilaterally pushing something in case the people who do have a vote and aren't here have an objection, but we're also not blocking you for long.
Okay, yeah, how about this? Once we have the minutes published on GitHub for this meeting, I can like cross-link the Team Compass 145 to that, just to kind of collect that.
Oh yeah, and ping the, yeah, that's great, because we made a team on GitHub for the JupyterLab Council. It's called
JupyterLab dash council.
Yeah, I believe that's what it's called.
Dash council. You got it. Okay, I'll do that probably later today. Okay, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. 2 other things I wanted to ask about. Hopefully these are brief. There's a long-running issue that a gentleman named Tomasz, who I don't know if he's on the call, opened about 2 months ago. We at one point closed it, but he reopened it. Frederick and I have tried to kind of understand Tomasz's issue. Frankly, the problem is that like it's a legit issue, but no one seems to be particularly interested in doing it. It concerns building documentation. So I'd appreciate if some fresh eyes could take a look at it. This is also a plug for the triage call tomorrow. Most of the issues get triaged much more quickly than this, but I decided to bring up 12151 here because it's been sitting kind of with a slow back and forth tennis game for a long time, and I just want other people to take a look at it. So please take a look when you get a chance. One other question, this is kind of geared towards Isabella here. When is the next Jupyter community call? Because as discussed at the previous meeting, we now have pretty much every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific is now booked with something. Next week, we have the security meeting, which is every 2 weeks. And then the following week, or maybe not, we have this
Not in the
notebook.
calendar, but it should be, sorry.
Yeah, we have this notebook extension migration office hours, which we had, I think, for the first time yesterday, and it's going to be like May 3rd, May 17th, May 31st, etc. So I know we've kind of played around with different times, but I don't know when the next one's going to be.
I have not publicly committed to a single time. My current plan, though, is to try for the alternating thing that people want anyway. And so my thought with that is well, I have to look at the time zones. There may be one that is like kind of early morning for West Coast, just since I know that was the group that was probably most irked by the April community call time. And then one that's more afternoon. That's my current plan, but I have not set a current time. I have to say, like, I am mildly disheartened by the state of the account. Like, I'm glad people are having meetings, but just because we've had this time slot for a while. So I'm trying to sort out something that I think is sustainable, because I would like the calls to keep going. And so far, nobody else has said they want to host. So that's my main concern. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a single time for you. I'm
Okay.
planning to try and dodge people's meetings, but my worst case backup is that since it's a monthly call, there may be someone that I ask like once a month, can we mess, or once every other month if we're alternating time, can I like take or share your slot or something?
Yeah, I'm not asking to put you on the spot right here and now to commit to something. If you want to continue this by email or on GitHub, that's fine. I will be out of town on vacation just after Memorial Day for a week, but otherwise my calendar is generally free.
Do you want to know so that you can schedule something else, or?
Also, I send out invites to my team
Right.
within my organization. So that's kind of my selfish reason for asking the question, is so that I can stay apprised.
No, it's a good question. I'm going to update right now. The community calendar basically has the old times and it's not accurate because I didn't want to put a fake new time and then keep moving it. But yes, I can make it a bigger announcement. I just haven't made a final decision.
Okay.
And I didn't want to start tossing people around with my intermediate decisions.
Yeah, there's some back and forth in the chat that suggests that the community call might displace something else, in which case, you know, we'll deal with that. Again, like I'll follow up with you separately next week if we haven't had a conversation about that. But at the same time, I know there's a few other folks who want to raise things up, so I'll yield my time to Darian, who's next on the agenda.
Thanks. Just one last point. I think the biggest proxy for whose call should have priority is just how many people show up. More people show up to the community call than the 0 people who showed up for office hours yesterday. So all the people who showed up for office hours yesterday were on the supply side. There were none on the demand side. So really, anytime those calls are overlapping, I think the community call wins for sure. Okay, so I opened a small PR to Lumino, adding a signal to split panel. Fred approved it. I just wanted to ask, I don't know how to release versions of Lumino. Does someone on this call know how to do that? And if possible, could someone please do that? Because there's a piece of code in JupyterLab that I meant to deprecate, I think in 2017. It's still there. And this would enable me to remove that.
If you have write on the NPM, you should be able to use the releaser.
Oh, I probably have the right to. I just don't have the knowledge to. So maybe you and I could do it
basically,
together.
I don't have the rights.
All right, I think between the two of us, we can solve this then. Cool. All right. Great. I think the only person on this call that this might affect is Martha, actually, because I think she also used the same split panel for the setting editor. Because the gist of this change is that when you resize a split panel, this will emit a signal. And the reason I wanted a signal was so that I could use that for state restoration to remember where you left it when you refresh the page. Split panels by default don't support that. And don't give you a way of knowing when that's happened. And so this will add that on the Lumino side. And then if you want to use that signal to remember the state of your split panel, you can. Okay, thanks. David?
Yes, I just wanted to mention briefly the progress that has been done in the front of collaborative editing in JupyterLab. So there is this PR that is open for review. Basically, it's using more of YPy, which is the pattern bindings for wires, which is a Rust implementation of YJS, let's say, that we use in the front end. So now we can do more things in the back end. And this PR loads files from the backend and also autosaves files from the backend. So it is supposed to solve a lot of issues, in particular regarding documents that could have been erased. Remember an issue opened by Fernando about that. I can just make a quick demo just to give you a feeling of how it's working. So I have already 2 browsers here. Let's open JupyterLab in one of them. Let's create a notebook. Let's open another JupyterLab. So the notebook is opened there too. Collaborative editing is working. If I change the notebook, here we can see the dirty states that has changed for 1 second, and then it's automatically saved from the backend. It can work so on every front end, and also from the backend. So you don't see it right now, but I'm going to add something. I'm going to add another letter, and it's also automatically updated in every front end. So
David,
now, yeah.
How are outputs getting into the document model? Are they being sent through the traditional WebSocket channel to the front end and then persisted, or are they being sent directly to the YJS backend?
So it's also synchronized through the YJS backend. It's a shared property of the document.
And I guess what I'm trying to gauge is, have we also solved the problem of output being lost when you close a long-running notebook?
No, I don't think it tackles this issue.
Okay, so you for the output to arrive in the YJS document, you still have to have a browser open.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Actually, thinking about that, I don't know. I would have to think a bit more about that, but maybe maybe it would synchronize automatically also. I've not looked at it, so I'm not sure about what I'm saying. So basically, yeah, the user is doesn't have to care about saving the document anymore. It behaves basically like Google Docs or VS Code. You know, that's the goal.
Another question: does the YJS backend have an API for getting a list of the versions of the document?
You mean like to be able to undo and so on, to have a...
No, I'm more thinking of if we wanted to build a UI that allowed me to see a list of all the changes made and click on an older version, sort of lightweight version control.
Yeah, so it's not implemented yet, but yeah, it's definitely on the roadmap. I think it collides a little bit with the checkpoints that we have currently. I don't think they make sense anymore once we have all these all Wi-Fi very well integrated. I think maybe, but that has to be discussed. Maybe we won't save the source of the document in the Wi-Fi NB file. I mean, it's a bit disruptive, but maybe it's going to be an opaque binary file that won't be visible directly, but we would need a tool to look at it, and all the information about the history of the file would be stored in there.
Yeah, we'll have to think about how we want to handle the checkpointing. Ironically, when we implemented the original checkpointing, we had already been talking about real-time collaboration. And I think we said at the time, Well, we don't have real-time collaboration yet. We'll temporarily checkpoint in this more pedestrian manner until we have real-time collaboration. So it's taken us a long time, but I don't know. We'll have to think about how to deprecate or what to do with the existing checkpointing.
Yeah, we'll need to think about that. That's it for
Amazing
me.
work.
Thank you.
This is fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the demo. Okay, Isabella.
Yeah, we're at time, so sorry. Real quick, just in 15 minutes, we're going to have the JupyterLab accessibility call. I forgot to put it on the top, but everyone's welcome. We'll talk about some new adventure. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. I think this markdown conversation is going to have to happen next week. And I think I might have to get better at time management. Sorry, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording in case there's anything last minute we need to say.
Okay.